Good morning, good afternoon, good evening to everyone, depending on where you are. Thank you so much for coming to my session today. What I would like to do today is to share with you a research project we have been doing here at the Loyalty Science Lab on managing customer loyalty in the retail space. Starting with a bit of a background. A couple of years ago, many of you probably have noticed a lot of media pieces that are talking about loyalty is not here anymore, loyalty is dead. And I think that started with a statement done by Mark Benioff from Salesforce, making a claim during his interview saying that loyalty is dead. And then there are a lot of other popular media articles that came with that. Even Harvard Business Review came up with the statement that customer loyalty is overrated. And this year, it hasn't really been easy on the retail industry or any business altogether. And we have seen some high profile retail failures such as Pier 1 Imports, Steinmart, JCPenney. These are just some of the examples. On the other hand, when we are really looking at customer loyalty, is it really truly dead? Interestingly, earlier this year, we see another series of articles actually published by Harvard Business Review called Today's Economy, the Loyalty Economy. And the basic point is that loyalty and customer metrics are really, really important. And companies, especially public companies, need to actually report those kind of customer metrics in their financial reporting practices. And the industry studies also shown that consumers are still quite loyal to their retailers. They're willing to be loyal to their retailers. And of course, we have the case of Amazon.com that has almost nearly half of the online retail market. And so we're seeing this divergent picture here. On the one hand, yes, it is harder to compete. It is harder to keep your customers loyal. At the same time, customers are not necessarily unwilling to be loyal to you. They need some guidance, need some practice. They need, whatever it is you do to connect with them in order to stay loyal. And so, especially given the pandemic situation or the new normal that we're kind of all getting used to, we have seen a lot of movements in people in terms of moving stores and moving the brands that they purchase. Based on McKinsey data, 17% of the consumers have already switched the primary stores. That's actually a pretty big percentage when you think that these are the stores that people mainly shop at. And brand switching is even higher. About 3/4 of individuals have switched their brands to try something else for a variety of different reasons. And so this presents a really great opportunity for our brands, for retailers in general, to be able to gain a lot of new customers, right? So you may have seen new customers that you have never seen at your store before or on your website before, and now they're coming and becoming a customer of you. The question is, can you actually keep them? Will people actually stay with you once they make that first purchase with you? And so a study, another industry report actually says that they found customers acquired during the COVID-19 time period actually have a lower retention rate compared with the non-COVID-19 audience or non-holiday, non-COVID-19 kind of audience. And so there is a lot of opportunities here, but there's also threats on that customer retention for the retailers. And so that kind of drives us to start this project as Loyalty Science Lab. We wanted to answer the questions of what exactly drives customer loyalty toward a retailer, right? In the retail space, what are the things that makes people loyal versus not loyal to a retailer? And so the guiding thought process into that project is that when we look at, there are many diverse reasons why people would be loyal to a retailer. And specifically, you can divide all of these or classify these different loyalty drivers into a number of different categories, right? And so one of them is more of a thinking related drivers. Okay, what do I mean by thinking related driver? These are the things that help people make a rational decision on what is the best for them, right? So some examples are the traditional things that you often hear retailers talk about: the price level they offer, the product quality they have, the location where they're located, the distance, how far it is from your home, and things like that. So if you were to think about one example of a retailer that really excel on these thinking related loyalty drivers, probably Walmart is one thing that comes to mind, where their price is very attractive to a lot of consumers. They also have wide assortment in their stores, creating this one-stop shopping experience. Right, so that's a category of thinking oriented type of drivers, guiding people's rational decision making. Then we have another category of things that drive people's loyalty based on people's feelings, right? And so some examples of ones over here would be the store ambiance. When you walk into the store, how does that make you feel, right? Enjoyable shopping experience. How much do you enjoy your shopping at the retailer, or whether in store or on the website? And what is that store image to you? What does that store mean to you? And so these feeling related drivers, I would probably say a great example of leveraging these kind of feeling related loyalty driver is the cosmetic store, Sephora. When you really talk to a lot of the twin and teenage girls and 20-year-old, really any age spectrum, if you ask them, what does that Sephora experience mean to you? A lot of them say, we love to go to the Sephora stores. We love to look at the different colors. We like to try the different things. And so to them, it's less about necessarily the price itself or the value itself, but it's more, what do I get out of my shopping experience with the company? So that's feeling oriented or feeling related loyalty drivers. And the last category is social or relationship oriented loyalty drivers. And so in this case here, we can look at, for example, your relationship with other customers that shop at the same store, whether that's with your family that goes to the same store, or with your friends, your social media interactions with others. And there's also a relationship with the store employees and relationship with the company itself, with the retailer itself. So those can also drive in terms of how loyal you will be towards a retailer. And so what I wanted to share with you today is actually a research project to try to identify which ones of these are more important, and they are important under what kind of situations. But before the big unveil, I would like to actually start with a little poll here of our audience and try to get an idea of what it is that you think are the most important. So I'm gonna go ahead and launch the poll here. And it's basically asking you two questions. One is, what type of drivers you consider to have the highest impact on retailer loyalty, right? So which one of these three categories are the most important thing to a retailer? And then which one of these have the least amount of impact on customer loyalty towards a retailer? I'll give you a minute or two to take the response here. Thank you. Okay, I'm gonna go ahead and end the poll here. So let me share the question, the results with you. On the first question, which driver has the highest impact on retail loyalty? The answer, 43% of you chose feeling related drivers. Okay, so that's the category number one. And then category number two is thinking related drivers. 36% of you thinking that's the most important thing. And then social related drivers is the 21% of the respondents here. For the one that's least impactful, retail loyalty, half of you chose thinking related drivers, and followed by social related drivers, and then feeling related drivers. And so I guess the conclusion out of this is that a lot of you thinking that feeling related drivers is what drives what makes a consumer loyal to a store. So let me share with you what we actually found. The research project, the methodology we actually use is called a meta-analysis. It's kind of a nerdy term, but to put in a easier to understand form, it's basically a study of studies. What that means is that we actually aggregated all of these other retail loyalty studies out there in the academia, like published retail loyalty studies, as well as some unpublished ones, altogether 319 of the studies. And we did extensive coding of those studies and really combing through the findings of the different studies, taking into consideration how they did the study, what kind of samples they used, and what kind of methodology they used, and so forth. And so aggregating together, these studies covered about close to 1 million consumers in that process. And based on then from that combing through the results, and then we can do another quantitative study across all of these different studies to make a conclusion to say, with all of these research studies that have been done on retailer loyalty, which ones are actually turn out to be the most important one. And so a general conclusion here, and then I'll get into a little bit more detail on under what circumstances these kind of balance could actually change. So which type of drivers has the most impact? Let me give you just a little bit of information on the numbers and how you actually interpret these numbers over here so you can follow along. The particular type of metric we actually use is a correlational coefficient effect size. And so for something that's positive, so basically for something that's positive related to loyalty, we are looking at a number somewhere between 0 and 1. Okay, so 1 is absolutely, basically, if you have this, you basically will have loyalty. 0 is saying whatever this thing is, it doesn't really affect loyalty. And so typically the rule of thumb is that if you're looking at a number of 0.1, that's basically considered to be a weak relationship, right? So there is some relationship there, but it's a pretty weak impact. And when you're looking at about 0.3 or so, that's considered to be a moderate impact level, right? So if you look at some of our metrics over here, they are basically in that moderate impact level. And then 0.5 to above, that's considered to be a really strong relationship. That basically means that these things will really have a lot of impact on the customer loyalty or whatever outcome that you are measuring there. And so with that in mind, what we have found, this is aggregating across all of the retailers, all of the samples, all of the research studies, that feeling related drivers. So we have a very smart audience here today. The feeling related drivers that involve things such as ambiance, enjoyable shopping experience, and store image, and so forth, has the highest impact. So it's, as you can see, the effect size here, 0.47. So getting close to that strong impact phase. And that is followed by the social related drivers or relationship related drivers. And lastly, by the thinking related drivers. And so the feeling related drivers, if you do the math, is actually about 52% more impactful than the thinking type of drivers. And the social drivers are about 23% more impactful than the thinking related drivers. And so one other thing too, I didn't really put in the actual numbers over here, but one interesting discovery we have is that the impact of these feeling and social related drivers have also increased over time. At the same time, the importance of those thinking, the traditional kind of retail mix type of components are actually decreasing in their impact over time. So this could be that consumers are different, thinking differently from what they used to, or it could be a generational shift as well from what is really driving what drives people to be loyal to a retailer. And this is an example. I think it's a pretty perfect example of consumers be loyal to a company because of a feeling related component. So this is, I took the screenshot from a online blogger called myfrugaladventures.com. And so she wrote an article about do-it-yourself home fragrance, creating it like a Williams Sonoma store. Right. And you can, just quickly read the message here is I love Williams Sonoma. I make a point of stopping every time I'm at the mall just to stroll through the beautiful store and smell the wonderful things that they're making. Right. And so when you read this passage, it really comes alive to you how the consumer is really truly enjoying the experience of being in the store. And that's how that store particularly grabs your attention, right? She actually made these fragrances based on the smell that she has smelled at Williams Sonoma store. So when you look at customer loyalty, it couldn't really be any more than this. And so Williams Sonoma as a retailer has been doing a really successful job in generating that memorable, enjoyable retail experience that give you that warm and fuzzy feeling of a home. Now, the question is, how do you actually do that in a non-store type of environment, right? Because we all know that because of the pandemic shutdowns, a lot of the retailers have been scrambling to really get their digital actions together, making sure that people are able to buy online, access them online, and do a variety of different things online and integrate that with their in-store experiences. And so the question is, will this feeling-oriented component continue to be important even if you're just sitting by the computer with a code interface? Would that really feeling actually matter? So we try to ask this question and of how it's different between the online and offline space, right? And we actually found that with the online, the feeling component actually become more important. And what that basically suggests is that in the online environment, these feeling related drivers, whether that's ambiance or that's the enjoyment of the shopping experience, actually becomes more important in that online environment. Of course, you don't have the store ambiance in terms of smell and so forth. Maybe one day we will, but so far we can't do that in the digital interface, but there's still other things. And I'll give you some examples later as well. But thinking component, a little bit more, is still statistically significant in terms of being a little bit more important online. The social relationship component becomes a little bit lower in the online space. So here's a quick example of the same Williams Sonoma store, but this is their digital interface. And I just took a screenshot yesterday. And this one, what they're showing on their website right now is, given that Thanksgiving is coming, so they're showing all of these ideas for how you can celebrate Thanksgiving in a very unusual year, and including an idea of even virtual events that you can use to celebrate Thanksgiving. And so when you are looking at this, a lot of it is not necessarily about thinking, right? You are not really thinking about the price or the exact product. What they're creating is that feeling, a connection with you about what's most important right now. And so a great example of portraying a certain feeling through just a digital interface. And additional things that we found was that retail context matter in how important these different drivers are as well. So for example, when we are looking at low involvement purchases versus high involvement purchases. So when we think about low involvement, these are things like your average grocery purchases. You just do it every week. You don't really think too much about it. Versus the high involvement experience, like you're buying electronic thing or you're buying a home appliance. What we found is that feeling overall is considered more important or the most important driver across the board. However, it becomes even more important in that low involvement experience. And that's not particularly surprising, because when the low involvement experience is where you are basically buying things, you are not really thinking too much about it, right? And so that feeling component actually drives people a little bit more, is how do I feel at the moment? I'm not really thinking that hard, what is driving my feeling. And so you see a spike in the importance of involvement in the feeling related drivers in this low involvement context. And another one is also feeling related drivers are also particularly important for the type of for fun kind of retail category. So examples are like Bass Pro Shops, selling all these equipment for recreational leisure purposes. And then on the right side here, you see a picture of a Lego store in China and demonstrating, that fun experience for the kids. And by the way, we are a big Lego household, and I'm being infected by my 2 kids with the Lego experience. You can probably see in the background over here, I have a rocket ship parked up there. And I'm not ashamed to admit that I actually put that together. It's one of my fun things to do outside of work. But think about, what is connecting you or connecting a customer with that Lego shop or with that Lego brand or even with Bass Pro Shop. It's a big part is that feeling related component, that fun that you can expect by going to the retailer, by buying from the retailer, and all of the experiences afterward. And another component of it too is also customer composition matters in these kind of situations too. Specifically, we look at males versus females. And when a research study had more of a male dominant sample, what we see is a bit higher of an impact of that thinking component. So still, feeling is still the driven component here, right? Because you see the biggest proportion that's devoted to feelings. But the thinking component becomes a bit bigger. And the social element, the relationship element becomes smaller for a more male dominant customer group. Versus for females, we see a strong feeling effect, and we see a very strong social effect as well, a smaller focus on those thinking-oriented components such as price and value and so forth. And so that basically means that if you're a retailer, you kind of also wanted to look at your customer group as well, right? Do you have a more female-oriented customer group? Do you have a more male-oriented customer group? And how do you interact with these customers and building relationships, putting in relationship efforts? Which one would you pay more attention to? And so forth. So your loyalty strategy needs to be adapted to your customer group. So let's take a little bit deeper look into some of these drivers, and within each category, what are the things that research study have found to be particularly important? And for thinking related drivers, the 5 most common ones that came up was product assortment, convenience, product quality, service quality, and value. Right. And the value kind of includes that price component in there as well. So that's kind of lumped into one category. And not surprisingly, I don't think it was a surprise to the audience here today, is that service quality is that major component. Okay, service quality is the most important thing, and that's in both offline cases and online cases among these thinking-oriented drivers. 2 other things I want to point out. In the online environment, the assortment becomes a really important factor, partly probably because people are expecting a wider assortment in the online space. And what's particularly interesting is this convenience concept, right? When you're thinking about convenience, usually you think about physical stores. Are they located close to me? Do they have easy parking where I can go and really just park my car and be able to go in and grab something conveniently? And so a lot of times we don't think as much about convenience in the online space, but convenience actually is a bigger driver in the online space. However, they would mean different things, right? You don't need to drive to a particular place. So this convenience is more about, is it easy to buy from you, right? If I were to go onto your website, is it easy for me to find stuff? Is it easy for me to check out in the process? Is it easy for me to return if the product doesn't fit right? And so that convenience component is actually quite important in the online environment. And I'll show you here that from a research report that was released a couple months back by the Wharton School's Baker Retailing Center. They have identified some of the top loyalty damaging problems when it comes to digital related space issues. One is that cumbersome, costly product return process, right? So again, it's not convenient for people to return something to you. And surprisingly, one of the most important thing is that website, the app is too difficult to navigate. So that's actually creating a lot of damage in terms of loyalty, not just that one-time purchase, but it's actually long-term loyalty as well. And also the difficulty to make a payment using the mobile phone or tablet was considered to be one of the top loyalty damaging problems as well. So all of these really suggest that on the on the online space, when you're thinking about these thinking-oriented drivers, a lot of times we're thinking about people price shop. We think about, people looking for assortment. Now, those things are continuing to be important. However, you have to really kind of more thinking about this convenient component. How can you make the consumer being able to shop at your store with much less effort, as little effort as possible? And on the feeling related drivers, we look at particularly three most important ones that have been studied in the past. One is that enjoyment of the shopping experience, and one is the store ambiance. I mentioned that earlier. The other one is the mental image that a retailer has in the consumer's mind. And so in all of these, whether it's offline or online, the enjoyment of the shopping experience was the most important element, followed by the retailer image, and lastly by the store ambience. And so this enjoyment of the shopping experience is really important. And you can see that the impact of each of these feeling related drivers are actually higher in the online environment compared with the offline environment. That's consistent with what we said earlier about the general trend, more emphasis on that feeling component in the online environment. But how do you do that online? So here are some examples, two examples of retail stores. The top one, Allbirds, and the bottom one here is a cosmetic, well, not exact cosmetic, but like a perfume, soap, candle kind of store that when you look at their interface, right, if this is something that the first thing you see when you go onto their website, it generates that feeling that it's going to be fun shopping with us. You're going to enjoy shopping with us because we are full of energy. We give you happiness. We will just give you that feeling instead of being a boring thing. I'm just going onto this website to buy this boring thing. I am actually experiencing something fun in the process. So it's just as important, and it's also as feasible to really creating that feeling generated component and creating that enjoyment of the shopping in the process. And then finally, for the social oriented drivers, we are looking at things including the relationship with the retailer. So directly relationship with the retailer, how are you feeling? How strong of a relationship you have with the retailer? One thing I do wanted to mention that in here, we did not include things like transactional relationships. So in other words, we are not looking at just because you are buying all the time from a retailer. That doesn't necessarily mean that you have a strong relationship with the retailer. So this is more of a concept, social relationship oriented, of how much of a social relationship you think you have with the retailer. And then of course, also relationship with the store employees as well, especially in the store environment, but as in the online, it's important as well. And relationship with your other customers in the process, other people who are shopping in the same store or with the social network around you, how does that drive your relationship with the retailer? And then finally, this one is the fourth one is the retailer's relationship investment. So this is not necessarily the existing relationship, how well you have with your customers, but more on how much you actually investing effort into driving customers' loyalty, into building a relationship with customers. So one example of this could be a loyalty program, right? A lot of retailers have loyalty programs, and the question is not necessarily that, do you have a loyalty program? The bigger question is, what are you using the loyalty programs for to drive that relationship with your customers? For example, when you think about a lot of retailers, they put a loyalty program in there and they're just thinking this is just another morphed form of coupons and discounts. But in reality, what you really should be doing is using that information that you are getting from those loyalty program members and utilize the data that they're generating for you, and being able to use that, leverage that information, leverage that insight to build a better relationship with the customers, right? So in the particularly what we see is that in the online space, that relationship investment actually gives you a higher impact on the long-term loyalty of your customers compared with your offline channel. So it becomes, as your business, retail business, shifts towards more online environment, it's actually more important that you pay attention to these kind of relationship investment measures. And one other thing I would like to share is in the process of managing customer service, managing people's store experience, there is a lot of businesses have to make this trade-off decision to say, um, let's pursue that idea of frictionless, meaning that we want this experience or consumers' experiences with us to be trouble-free, right? So that's kind of more of the frictionless concept. And some others who say, frictionless is probably not enough. We're going to try to do more of designing delight, designing pleasure into people's shopping experience with us. And so we kind of look at that too to say, okay, from all of these research studies, what are they telling us about the relative importance between these two things? And so we have proxies for it. On one side, more the frictionless side, we are looking at the service quality component, whether you have a good service quality and can have a trouble-free shopping experience. On the other side, we have that enjoyment of the shopping experience that's more on the delight and pleasure component. Overall speaking, especially in the offline environment, the two are actually quite equally impactful. So in other words, these two things are both important for consumers. But when you are looking at the online environment, that pleasure and delight component becomes a bit more important. I think partly because also in the online, it's too easy to become just the same online store as everyone else. And so people are looking for a little bit something different and looking for you to actually delight them and giving them pleasure in the process. And so overall speaking, the conclusion would probably be that both of these components are important, but depending on the retail context that you have, that delight or pleasure component can become more important in driving your long-term customer loyalty. So overall, the key takeaway, I think, from the research project is one, is that when I think a lot of retailers, when you think about their practice of what it is they do on a daily basis, they are so very focused on their product inventory, on their assortment, on their price, and all of these very traditional thinking related factors. That their entire process is almost like completely inundated with the decision making related to these factors. Now, I'm not necessarily saying that we throw that out of the window. That's not important at all. But it's important to recognize that all of these things, you wanted to do it well, right? You wanted to be able to match the level of what your competitors are doing to be able to create that competitive parity. But even though you can use these factors to get people to come into your door, they are not particularly good at building long-term loyalty. And it will be less and less so in the future, that these factors are just going to be, people just expect you to do well in those, right? So even if you do well in these different factors, it doesn't really surprise anyone, and it doesn't necessarily make anybody stick with you. And so they create that competitive parity, but it's not enough to create that competitive advantage. So instead, what you should be focusing on are things like you wanted to enhance consumers' feelings, particularly that enjoyment of the shopping experience. Think about how you can, whether that's the design of your web interface, whether that's your in-store experience or the image that you have with consumers, what are the things that you wanted to do to enhance that experience and that shopping feeling when consumers are shopping with you. And then, of course, based on our findings, one conclusion was also that managing your customer experience will depend on the retail channel that you are focusing on and the retail context. So depending on the context, what kind of products you are selling and what kind of retail channel that you are dealing with, your loyalty strategy is going to be adjusted a little bit in terms of how much do you emphasize that enjoyment of the shopping experience versus how much you might want to focus on the relationship-oriented drivers, for example. I wanted to sort of leaving you with some food for thought. This is the actually a separate thing, so I would just scratch the surface over here, is that one of the downside with a called meta-analysis method is that it takes what existing research has looked at, right? And so these are all the things that people have potentially looked at. So it's a summarization of what existing research has told you. And one of our other thing is really to look at, okay, beyond these traditional things, the traditional thinking and feeling and social elements, are there other ways to actually get to that loyalty nirvana, essentially? And so what we are in the process looking into is really looking at these different loyalty models and what are the different potential loyalty models that you can do to achieve that long-term customer loyalty. And our basic viewpoint is that there are more than one way to roam, right? And so specifically, we look at 3 different overall category of strategies that you can follow as a retailer to achieve customer loyalty. So one is more of a meaning-based loyalty. So this is the kind of loyalty model where you're building loyalty based on what you stand for, right? This is a very broad category, and it can have a variety of different things. For example, it is individually meaningful to me. And I mentioned Sephora earlier. And so for many consumers, that Sephora brand is also that it fits me the best. It gives me the best shopping experience. It gives me the best product. It makes me look beautiful, right? So it's individually meaningful for them. You could also be meaningful for a collective audience. For example, when you think about retailers, I think REI is a really good example of that, where their corporate social responsibility efforts, they support the green consumption. They support a lot of the environmental causes, I think goes very well with the brand name. And so they create that collective meaning of remember the retailer image component that creates that meaning for customers. And you can also be creating that functional meaning-based loyalty and symbolic meaning-based loyalty. For me, when I think about functional based loyalty, a lot of that times I think about Taylor Stewart. It's one of these more local hardware stores that doesn't really match the scale of Home Depot or Lowe's. However, their employees in the store, when I go in there, if I need something, they're always very happy to help, and they always give me great guidance. And so that's more of a functional, that they offer the best, in terms of functionality and so forth for you. And then there are some other ones that are building on symbolic. We all have our maybe favorite local shop, because it just means something different for us, right? And when you think about a company, for example, Etsy could be another one that for crafters, for sellers and buyers on Etsy, it means something. It's not necessarily whether it's the best product available, but it's that uniqueness. Is that what it represents to people who love crafting and creating beautiful things, right? And so that's one, and that's kind of more actually the more traditional ones that we typically think about, is that what does my brand mean to the customer, and how do I create loyalty from those meanings? But there are 2 other paths in the process as well, because ultimately consumers can only be feeling really attached to a certain number of brands or retailers, right? They're not going to be acting like that way across the board for all of the retail categories, for all of the retailers. And so there are still opportunities in those other spaces. One of them we call automated loyalty. So this is a loyalty strategy or loyalty mechanism that are based on 2 driving forces. One is based on habit, right? We are all habitual animals. And so a lot of what we do on a daily basis is basically highly habitual. So a lot of times which grocery stores you're going to is a lot of times it's just this I have always been going to on a Sunday afternoon, and that's what I always do. And so it becomes something that consumers don't feel, actually none of those components, they just do. Okay, so it kind of bypass all those thinking, feeling process, or even relationship components. It's just something that they do. And so a lot of the loyalty programs that are designed, if you design it well, that's part of my previous research studies have shown that you can really build that habit space, in order to get people to be loyal to you, building on their purchase habits. And a lot of convenience stores, for example, would fall really well into that category. And another type of automated loyalty is building on that status quo bias. What does that really mean? So basically, if you think about all of the things you subscribe to, whether that's you make a monthly donation to a organization, or you buy something such as companies as HelloFresh or Blue Apron that deliver a meal to you on a regular basis, you subscribe to that. And a lot of times, even when consumers stop using certain things, that stop reading the magazine or stop using the service, and they still just keep that subscription going, because from a human psychology perspective, it's easier to maintain the status quo than make an effort to do something different. And so that's where another automated loyalty, I think, with the example I mentioned earlier with HelloFresh and Blue Apron, is kind of generating that automated loyalty, right? When in the beginning you tried it, works well, so I'm going to settling into that, and I'm just keeping on doing that, and I don't want it to change. I don't want to bother to go change. Right, so that's one type, the automated loyalty. That's very different, entails a very different set of customer management strategies compared with a meaning-based loyalty. I don't have all the time to get to that, but if you wanted to reach out to me, and I would be happy to talk more about that. The last type is more of the system-based loyalty. So this is the type where Amazon is actually kind of an example of this. If you think about the Amazon store, one of the main changes they made throughout the years is to be able to have all these sellers to sell within the Amazon store, right? So they're essentially drawing on all of these other sellers to be able to create this ecosystem with a lot of partners, and even their delivery drivers are in many ways are partners with them, to be able to build that loyalty because of the efficiency created by the ecosystem. Not only that, but also thinking from a data analytic perspective, having the shared insight across these different things can also really help you understand a customer better by building this ecosystem with partners. So you are not doing this alone. That's essentially what this means, that you may not necessarily, as if you're a small retailer, for example, you may not necessarily be able to build the kind of scale as Amazon can. However, it doesn't mean that you cannot create partnerships with other stores along the way to be able to create that niche market. And there's actually research study that shows that for these direct-to-consumer brands, the smaller direct-to-consumer brands, how can they win in the presence of these big giant brand names out there in the market? And one of the really effective strategies for these direct-to-consumer brands to actually connect with each other, to partner with each other, and to create that more of a bigger, efficient, and wider network of things that consumer can connect to. And so this is just kind of food for thought to leave here. Hopefully you can think a little bit more about this, and I would love to hear your feedback, because this is something that's ongoing. We're still kind of thinking through this process right now. So that's all I have on my presentation side. I would love to hear some questions, comments, feedbacks from the audience.
So Yuping, Alexander Maley is asking, is customer experience part of the feeling related drivers?
I would say probably both, depending on what aspect of the customer experience you are thinking about. So I would say customer experience can be the very objective, like the service quality assessment component. But I think a big part of that customer experience is indeed more of a feeling driven component. So that's also one of the reasons why, we hear so much talking about customer experience now, because that customer experience is going to be important in connecting with customers in the long
run. And excellent. Please type in your questions and put them in the chat room. Yuping, I had, as you were presenting your last slide, it is clear that, your three types of loyalty that you have, they're not exclusive. There is some amount of overlap. And as I was looking at it, I thought, maybe there is a journey that a customer goes through. Initially, they have meaning-based loyalty, and then it goes to, habit-based loyalty, or automated loyalty, as you call it. Is that something that you see, or what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, Kieran, that's a really great point. You are absolutely right. These one of the reasons we kind of put them into these little overlapping circles, partly because they are not necessarily mutually exclusive to each other, right? And so when you think about, you gave a really good example where initially when I first come to your store, let's say I gave the example of REI earlier. It's a very meaningful brand. Consumers identify with that. And so in the beginning, maybe you are drawn to the store because of that, right? Because of they represent good things that you like what they stand for. However, over the course of time, as you really go along with the process, do you constantly think about that? Maybe not. Over the course of time, you eventually be like, I need to go camping. I need some camping gears. REI is where I go. Right. And so you eventually form this automated loyalty component where you just continue to do the exact same thing over and over again. And the initial reason of why you are loyal to that store kind of fade from memory. And we can all find examples probably of that for in our personal lives. Initially we did something, because of a certain reason. Years later, when I ask you, why were you loyal to this store in the first place? Many of you probably don't even remember what it was. So so there is an evolution, I would say, across the different stages. And then sometimes in certain situations, you will see cases where in the automated loyalty, for example, one of the really important strategies is that you actually don't want to over communicate with your customers, right? You wanted to keep the consumers basically, you don't want to wake them up. Sort of essentially, that's basically, when you communicate too much in that kind of situation, you wake them, you jolt them out of the habit. Then in that situation, then you are jolting them out of, to say, status quo, maybe not good, my habit maybe not good. Now they're going and search for something else, and then you're risking losing the customer in the process.
Yeah, I'm going to ask you the next question, but before that, I wanted to give you a couple of anecdotal examples. I was going to ask you a question. What are some social related strategies that in the online setting? And I just realized that my son bought upgraded his iPhone the other day and got his iPhone 12. And the way he bought it was through online chat. Mm-hmm. And that is a social related way in which you could build the social related loyalty. And so that's something that struck me. The other thing I wanted to tell you, which in an online as well as offline setting, a good example of the third kind of loyalty, the system-based loyalty, might be Costco, where they have a bunch of different companies that you want to change a roof, they have something. You want to wash a dryer, they have something, things like that. So some food for some examples there. Gina French is asking a question. Can you speak to social media's impact on loyalty?
Yeah, sure. So I think that especially when you're looking at social, we look at average across retail space. It's social component is the second one, right? And so a lot of times I hear companies basically say social media is not really giving me anything, right? It doesn't necessarily give me, like, people are not making a purchase off of my social media. Of course, you can in some situations, but in a lot of situations, you are not necessarily getting that direct economic return. But I think where the social media plays in is that building that relationship. We know that that one of the biggest drivers within the social loyalty is your relationship with the retailer, right? How do you develop that relationship with the retailer? Especially, how do you develop that relationship with the retailer when your stores are all closed, right? In that kind of situation, what do you do then? I think that the companies, retailers who are doing a great job in the social media space is really winning at this point in time in being able to keep that more personalized kind of connection with the customers, and being able to build that, still keep customers engaged in that process. So I think it's a really important part of the retail strategy, and it can help with that bonding experience with the consumers.
Liu-Ping, can you see the chat on your screen, on your interface?
Yeah, I can open it up.
See, Mike Ferrari has a comment and a question. Maybe it's yeah, and if you can, if not, I'll read it.
Okay, so Mike is asking a question about that. I'm gonna just go ahead and read the comments here. So, feeling drive loyalty. People like to feel good about what they buy, and then they feel good when they're recognized by being loyal. It's the circle of loyalty and spending. But what percentage of the consumers wanted to be anonymous and don't want to succumb to any of the drivers that you mentioned? That's actually a great question. Because in reality, when you're thinking about, for example, building relationship with customers, you really can't, in a way, you can't really build a relationship with a faceless consumer, right? If you don't know anything about the consumer and so forth, that can potentially become a problem. I think that there are still other ways to basically be building relationship. For example, when we think about enjoyment of the shopping experience, right? Do you necessarily have to identify who the consumer is when you're building that experience? I don't think you really need to, right? If you are thinking about maybe a loyalty program, yeah, sure, the consumer need to be willing to share that information with you and allowing you to track their purchases in order to getting those rewards. But some of these drivers also don't necessarily depend on knowing a whole lot about the customers. And they are the passive loyalty kind of lurkers in your customer group that can do that. The other thing I will say is that I've talked with one of my advisory board members is from Visa, and they have done these extensive research studies of consumers when it comes to these kind of privacy and data considerations. And what they actually overwhelmingly see over there is not necessarily that people are just don't want to share. Right. The fundamental driver is actually not necessarily that we just don't want it to share. Majority of the time, people are making a decision based on what am I getting for what I share. Right. And so as a retailer, I think in dealing with these anonymous or wanting to be anonymous consumers, one thing is that you can't do these other things that does not require them to give you all that data. At the same time, I think there's also that what is the value that you're providing by having the data? And I think that in a lot of consumers' mind, when retailers are gathering that data, they're doing it for very selfish purposes, right? The consumers are not necessarily see something in return. In that kind of situation, of course, they don't want it to share with you. So I think it's also that value component, not necessarily economic value, but the general broadly defined value of what it is that you are providing in return for the customer data. If I wanted to get you so that I can invite you maybe to a big event, you know, where you meet the best designer, the top designer that behind this particular brand, you know, maybe consumer will be interested in being part of that. So I think that engagement component is a big piece as well in the loyalty management.
I think we're coming to a close. Yuping, before we close, one small question. Do you have any, you know, if I want to do a little bit of reading on this on my own, do you have any recommendations that, you know, where, you know, I could find a little more of this stuff?
Sure. I will do a little shameless promotion here, self-promotion here, that I would say you know, definitely follow us for more research insights like this. We share not only just the research projects that we do, but we also share what we read from other academic researchers. These are all scientifically sound published research studies in the topic of loyalty. And so we have LinkedIn where we share a lot of the general postings, and we have a Medium blog as well where we share more in-depth articles. And so beyond these, for better understanding of retail loyalty, I would probably say recommend a couple of different potential books. One of the best books, you know, that represents the changing environment of retail, I think is Professor Barbara Kahn from Wharton School. She has a book called The Shopping Revolution. I think that's a great read to understand how people's retail behavior is really changing and how retailers can be successful in this space. The other one that I'm actually kind of in the process of reading right now for another research project, I really like the concept, is called Heartificial Empathy. Heartificial. So instead of artificial, is heartificial empathy. And so that book, the main idea is really talking about in the future of this very data analytic driven world, including marketing, how can we instill that component of empathy into it so that it's not so specifically just data and cold data and data only, right? So that's another book I would recommend. And then if you are interested on that automated loyalty concept, I think there are a couple of great habit related books out there, from starting with the earliest one, The Power of Habit by Charles Duhigg, and also Hooked from Nir Eyal would be a great read in that space as well.
Well, Yuping, this has been great. There is a question: does the Loyalty Science Lab accept research projects?
Yes, we do. We are happy to collaborate with retailers and businesses in general. As you can see that I mentioned some other earlier projects that we have actually collaborated with businesses. So we come in, actually, one of the things is that we don't necessarily do research projects to prove a okay, let me put it in the other way. We're coming in from an unbiased perspective. So we are curious minds, basically wanting to understand about customer loyalty. And so when we do collaborative research projects, we try to come in with a blank slate in a way to try to understand a situation and try to answer some loyalty related questions. So definitely we do, we love to have the opportunity to collaborate with businesses on understanding some loyalty issues. Thank you for asking.
Well, wonderful. Yuping, this has been great. Thank you so much. And thanks everyone for attending. If you have any questions, please feel free to reach out. I will be also mailing out a recording of this session. So if you want to share it with other people. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you all so much for coming. I really appreciate it. Have a good day.
Yeah, have a nice day, everyone. Bye.